So, I suspect that you are very pleased and relieved finally to be finished with Aeschylus. I know that his plays are pretty challenging for a student relatively new to ancient Greek literature to have to take on as the first author in a course. So I want to commend you for persisting as much as you did through the plays this far. And we're now in this series of 4 videos coming up, finishing up this session, are going to discuss the 3 plays that comprise the trilogy Oresteia that you either have just finished or are about to finish. And then we're going to also relate this series of plays to the history of the times. This video also closes the segment on Delian League that we've just finished, and in particular, these plays tie in very closely to the Areopagus Council, and we're going to talk about all that as we discuss 5th century BC Athenian history as it relates particularly to this trilogy that was produced in 458 BC. Now, one point of clarification, technical point for your exams especially. If you discuss the Oresteia trilogy or the 3 individual plays, Agamemnon, Libation Bearers, and Eumenides, be especially careful to distinguish the name of the trilogy and the name of the 3 individual plays. So Oresteia, the trilogy, covers all 3 of these plays, but the individual plays have these 3 names. Be sure not to confuse those when you're discussing those on your exam, either the midterm or the final exam. So one point that I just want to put in for clarification. All right, now the next thing to do here is to give some background on what's going on historically so that we can underscore the high importance these plays have with the politics of the time. You'll notice that we have this date, 462 BC, this revolution, and you'll notice that this is 4 years prior, and remember that BC years, the higher numerically numbered years are the earlier years as opposed to the later years, which are numerically lower. 462 BC is 4 years prior to 458 BC. So this trilogy of plays came a little bit after this revolution. Now, what happened in the revolution? This had to do with our esteemed Athenian politician Pericles and a guy named Ephialtes, whom we otherwise know nothing about. But the 2 of them conspired in 462 BC to radicalize the Athenian democracy. One of the consequences of this radicalization is that the Athenian populace got quite a bit more power than they had had previously, and therefore the populace would end up making most of the major decisions for Athenian policy, as well as electing most of the major officials of the city. Now, a consequence in addition to that is that this Areopagus Council and some other older institutions in the Athenian government ended up being stripped of power. The Areopagus Council, remember, was the Supreme Court, as it were, that was set up by Solon when he was Archon in 594 BC. Now, in this revolution, the Areopagus loses its powers. Not coincidentally, the Areopagus Council is the site of the trial of Orestes described in this 3rd play, Eumenides. And so this particular trilogy is a major political statement for Athens, tying in directly with contemporary Athenian politics to the Athenian audience watching this trilogy. So these are the points that we're going to tie in together as we review these 3 plays. Okay, let's begin therefore with Agamemnon. Agamemnon starts off in the darkness. You saw that you have the watchman. He's a relatively ordinary guy, and he's actually kind of a comic figure. Had he had a wristwatch, he would be looking like this, saying, "My shift is going to end soon," because it's been a very long, cold night, and he wants to end his shift. So he starts off watching for something, and then all of a sudden something appears, and he immediately sprints downstairs into the palace, because he's up on a tower, down into the palace in order to inform the residents of the palace what he has seen. And what has he seen? He has seen a signal fire that has lit up some distance away that indicates that the city of Troy has fallen. And the Greek expedition from Greece to Troy that eventually brought Troy down after 10 years was led by the king of Mycenae, Agamemnon. And of course, he is, as you see, the title figure of the first play. So the watchman immediately goes running downstairs to inform the queen, Clytemnestra, wife of Agamemnon, that Troy, in fact, has fallen. And of course, that's going to mean that the Greeks will be coming back at some point. And of course, Agamemnon eventually will be returning to the palace at Mycenae. So then we get the chorus. The chorus comes on stage, and they turn out to be a group of elders who are so elderly, in fact, that they are apparently infirmed walking, because there's a reference in their very long introductory chorus to their walking on sticks and therefore feeling powerless, not having any power. So they're not only are they physically not able to get around, but they also have a great deal of difficulty exerting themselves in any effective way, either with government or with the civic process in the city of Mycenae or anything else. Now, one interesting point to note about the city, the setting for this Agamemnon, is that it actually isn't at Mycenae. Curiously, it's being set at the later city of Argos, which is one of the major political cities during the 6th, 5th, 4th centuries BC in Greece. And Argos was built very close to the site of the original site of Mycenae. This is not a mistake on the part of Aeschylus, and it's something that the audience would probably have understood quite well, especially at Athens, because Argos was a city that tended to take different sides in the war, and frequently it was an ally of the Athenians. It was not, however, a member of the Delian League. It was, in fact, an independent city, and it would simply ally with whichever side seemed to be convenient at that particular time. As you will see, later on when we get to Eumenides, there's a particular reason why Argos is mentioned in this context, and why Aeschylus is essentially revising ancient Greek history by substituting the city of Argos, the modern city for his time, for the original, really ancient city of Mycenae. Okay, so the chorus comes on stage, and it becomes immediately clear as you listen to their opening chorus that they are not totally at ease with the situation. You would think that they would be jubilant at the news of the fall of Troy and the return of their master Agamemnon, but they don't appear to be. They are concerned that something is amiss. You can tell that because they, first of all, are a little bit concerned about the history about what's going on with the marriage of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. And then also they make a reference to a specific omen in which a bird of prey grabbed up a rabbit, or a hare actually, mother hare, that had been pregnant with babies, and that the goddess Artemis, who was actually opposed among the gods to the destruction of Troy, has seen this and is in fact quite displeased at what in fact has occurred. Well, now Artemis herself plays a major role in the life of Agamemnon that turns out to be rather unfortunate, because historically, prior to the Trojan War, Agamemnon had been one day on a hunt in which he had slain a large stag. But when he gave thanks to the gods for his success, he forgot, unfortunately, to thank Artemis. And of course, she's the goddess of the hunt. So in her anger, when Agamemnon became the leader of the expedition to Troy, Artemis insisted that he would have to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia, who was the favorite daughter among his children, for his wife Clytemnestra, before he could go over to Troy. And his ships got stalled at a location called Aulis, which is quite a bit northeast of Mycenae. And it was a port city that would have allowed them to go from there right across, but they got stalled there because the winds were turned in the wrong direction. And the only way to get the winds to go in the right direction was to make the sacrifice. Because of this, when Clytemnestra heard about this, of course, she was raging mad about it. The other problem about Clytemnestra was that the marriage to begin with was a little bit questionable. Clytemnestra was one of two daughters of Tyndareus, the king of Sparta. And interestingly, Clytemnestra's sister was Helen, the famous Helen, who becomes the wife of Menelaus, and it's, of course, her kidnapping, in quotes, that ends up sparking the war in the first place. So Clytemnestra has a lot of personal interest in this war that's adverse to Agamemnon's interest. So she, therefore, is going to be plotting all the time that Agamemnon is away for his murder, as it turns out. And that's partly because she also falls in love with the bastard cousin of Agamemnon named Aeschylus. And Aeschylus, of course, is the illegitimate son of Thyestes. And the curse that exists already with the house of Atreus exists because of the conflict that had happened before with Atreus and his brother Thyestes. When Thyestes had an affair with Atreus' wife Merope, Atreus invited Thyestes to dinner. Prior to that, Atreus had invited Thyestes' children over and had slain them and then fed them to Thyestes for dinner. And it's because of this infraction that Aeschylus specifically wants vengeance against Agamemnon. So it turns out that Aeschylus and Clytemnestra have a common interest to eliminate Agamemnon, even though their reasons and motives for doing so are in fact different. So that is the intrigue that's been going on, and that's what the chorus in their opening set of speeches is really worried about, what is now going to happen once Agamemnon comes back. So Agamemnon returns. When he comes on his chariot, he has with him a slave, and her name is Cassandra. This is the famous prophetess who always would give prophecy of correct things that are going to happen in the future. But because of a curse that had been imposed on her by Apollo, because Apollo had a deal with her that she would sleep with him, but then she tried to back away from that deal, Apollo cursed Cassandra so that anything that she was ever prophesizing, no one would ever believe. So she, in fact, prophesies successfully the fall of Troy and also her own murder, as well as that of Agamemnon, at the hands of Agamemnon's wife Clytemnestra. But she ends up accepting it willingly. Now that's coming up a little bit later. But for right now, the scene that we have is that Agamemnon brings to Clytemnestra this slave Cassandra, who incidentally herself was a prominent figure in Troy in her own right. She wasn't just any ordinary person. And once they are together, then Clytemnestra invites Agamemnon into the palace, stepping on either a red or purple carpet, depending on the translation, that signifies royalty, but also signifies divine privilege. Agamemnon is alarmed and says to his wife Clytemnestra, no, I can't do this. This would be hubristic for me to do this. And Clytemnestra says, no, you're entitled to do so. Come on in. And so Agamemnon goes into the palace where he's going to take a bath, which will turn into a bloodbath. More on that later, of course. Then Clytemnestra tries to invite Cassandra to come in as well, but it appears that Cassandra cannot speak Greek because she remains mute, or else perhaps she's so traumatized that she won't speak. So Cassandra remains on top of the chariot as a mute character, so it appears. And so Clytemnestra goes off stage. Now, an interesting point here with acting. Aeschylus originally had only 2 speaking actors on stage. He was, in fact, the first playwright, we believe, according to Aristotle's Poetics later on, who had more than 1 speaking actor on stage. And remember, the rule is you could only have originally 2 speaking actors, and later on it became 3. Now, Aeschylus did actually transition over to allowing 3, and in this play, he does it. But it's curious to see Cassandra on stage here as an unspoken speaking character for quite some time, because according to the later comic playwright Aristophanes in his play called Frogs, where he's evaluating the differences between Aeschylus and the later playwright Euripides, one of the things that annoyed audiences about Aeschylus, apparently, if we believe Aristophanes, is that he would tend to keep characters on stage for a lengthy period and not have them speak, such as Niobe, for instance, a play we don't have anymore. But apparently Niobe, the grieving mother of 14 children who were all slain by Apollo and Artemis because she was hubristic and boasted that she had 7 times more children than they did, or their mother did, she ends up losing all 14 of them in 14 murders, and she's weeping on stage, but she's turned with her back like this, veiled, and she doesn't speak for a long time all through the play. So in the same way, Cassandra doesn't speak. It looks like Cassandra is going to be a non-speaking role, but then all of a sudden, after the chorus tries to get them to speak after Clytemnestra's off stage, after Agamemnon's off stage, and that's the two speaking actors, we think. All of a sudden, Cassandra lets out an outburst of Apollo! And the irony, of course, is that she's calling for Apollo, the one who has abused her, essentially, by inflicting this curse upon her. But also, we have this trick about the acting role that we think that this is going to be a non-speaking role, when in fact it turns out that it's actually a speaking role. There, in fact, were 3 actors in the play, after all, as it turns out. In any event, Cassandra, in yelling out for Apollo, is emitting a cry of distress, because she now recognizes that she, in fact, cannot avoid the fate of going into the palace of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra and being summarily dispatched by Clytemnestra together with Agamemnon. And again, she does accept that fate willingly. The chorus, of course, as we must expect from the curse on Cassandra, doesn't understand what she's talking about. They think she's just blabbering nonsense. And remember, again, from that point when they talk about being on staves, they're acting as if they're helpless and they can't do anything. So after Cassandra goes into the chorus, the palace, the chorus starts talking, wondering what's going on, and then all of a sudden they hear screams of distress coming from the palace, and they suddenly realize that a murder is taking place, and they get into a stir. And it's quite interesting to see each individual speaker. That's actually quite unusual in tragedies, from the ones we have surviving, for the individual speakers all to talk like that. So each one gives a specific idea about what to do, but they can't make up their minds. And then, of course, comes word from the palace from Clytemnestra that Agamemnon and Cassandra are both dead, and the corpses are revealed. So we have this really horrifying murder by wife against husband and lover, ironically with the wife herself conspiring with her own lover, who is a member of the same family with Agamemnon. This is all just so twisted within the house of Aeschylus. We have this whole really, really horrendous murder, which incidentally is also regicide, that's the slaughter of the king, being committed, and therefore it's a violation not only against Agamemnon personally, but also against the city of Mycenae, as the chorus, in fact, tries to object. But now we see where the powerlessness of the chorus really comes across. As much as they may want to rumble about what has happened, it is clear that both Aegisthus and even more so Clytemnestra hold the power in their hands. And for the time being, there is nothing that the chorus can do. So, this horrifying scene opens this trilogy. Now, of course, what has to happen is we have to have the advent of the son Orestes, who has been out in exile, who is going to come back in order to carry out vengeance at the behest of the god Apollo against his mother on behalf of his father. That's the next play that we're going to take up, and that's the next video in this 4-video series on Aeschylus' Oresteia. So come on right back immediately. We'll be back for the next video.